Most people assumed the past was dangerous only during moments of chaos, plagues, invasions, disasters that arrived loudly and left ruins behind. But that belief is comforting, not accurate. For most of human history, danger didn't look dramatic. It didn't interrupt daily life. It blended into it. People didn't wake up expecting to survive extraordinary threats. They woke up expecting normal days, surrounded by things that felt familiar, trusted, and safe. And this is where history becomes unsettling, because many of the things that quietly killed millions weren't considered dangers at all. They were routines. Imagine starting your day the way your parents did, and their parents before them. You drink water that everyone drinks. You eat food prepared the way it always has been. You follow customs no one questions. Nothing feels wrong. And yet, without knowing it, your life expectancy has already been cut in half. This sounds fake to us now, but it was completely normal. Clean water, for example, is so fundamental to modern life that it's almost invisible. You turn on a tap without thinking. But for most of history, water was a gamble taken multiple times a day. Rivers doubled as sewers. Wells were shared with animals. Rainwater was collected wherever it could be trapped. And here's the part. No one expects people didn't connect dirty water to disease. Illness felt random, even when it wasn't. Entire families could be wiped out after doing nothing more dangerous than drinking what everyone else drank. There was no warning sign, no smell, no immediate pain, just a slow collapse that felt like fate. And what makes this even more disturbing is that water was, and the only silent threat hiding in plain sight. Food, the most basic act of survival, was just as dangerous. Preservation methods were limited. Mold was common. Meat spoiled quickly. Grain storage attracted pests. And yet, people ate anyway, because there was no alternative. Hunger was more frightening than the risk you couldn't see. The most unsettling part wasn't the poisoning itself, it was how normal it felt afterward. Stomach pain, weakness, sickness, these weren't emergencies. They were expected parts of life. If you had lived then, you wouldn't think something was wrong. You would think this was just how the body worked. As life unfolded inside these invisible risks, pain became something humans learned to tolerate rather than avoid. For centuries, pain was not treated as a problem to be solved. It was a condition to be endured. Medical procedures were performed with the assumption that suffering was unavoidable. Surgeries happened while patients were awake, fully conscious, held down by others, or simply instructed not to move. And this is where it becomes disturbing. People didn't fear surgery because it might fail. They feared it because it would almost certainly succeed at inflicting unbearable pain. Many chose death over treatment, not because they were irrational, but because the calculation made sense. Survival came at a cost that not everyone could pay. At first, this seems like ignorance, a lack of knowledge, something easily dismissed from a modern perspective. But that assumption doesn't last long, because the people of the past were not surrounded by alternatives. Pain relief did not exist. Sterilization was unknown. Infection was common. Even small injuries could become fatal. And yet, life went on. Children were born, work was done. Societies functioned. This wasn't chaos. It was order built on endurance. Cities themselves reflected this normalization of danger. From a distance, historical cities appear beautiful stone buildings, narrow streets, marketplaces full of life, but nothing about them smelled like the paintings. Human waste was dumped into streets or nearby waterways. Animals lived among people. Rot, smoke, and decay filled the air. And here's the quiet truth now. One thought this was unusual. Perfume wasn't luxury, it was survival. Incense wasn't spiritual decoration. It was an attempt to make the environment tolerable. The danger wasn't dramatic. It was atmospheric. What happened next sounds impossible to modern ears, but it shaped entire civilizations, because when danger feels normal, it stops being questioned. Knowledge becomes controlled not just by power, but by habit. Literacy was rare. Information traveled slowly. Most people lived and died believing the world worked exactly as they were told it did. Disease wasn't caused by germs. It was caused by imbalance, bad air, divine will. Bloodletting made sense within that framework. Removing blood to cure illness sounds absurd today. But when cause and effect are invisible, humans create explanations to survive uncertainty. Doctors weren't foolish. They were operating inside the limits of what could be known. And this wasn't limited to medicine. Justice followed the same logic. Punishment was public. Pain was intentional. Fear was a tool, not a flaw. Executions and torture weren't hidden because they weren't shameful. They were instructional. Order was maintained not through trust, but through visibility. And the most unsettling part is this: it worked. For centuries. Stability existed, but it was built on the assumption that individual lives were expendable. Life itself was cheap in large systems. Massive projects were constructed with the understanding that people would die. There were no safety standards, no compensation, no expectation of protection. If you were injured, you were replaced. If you died, the work continued. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was efficiency in a world where survival was already uncertain. When life expectancy is low, the value of any single life changes. To understand how this became normal, you have to stop imagining the past as a primitive version of the present. It wasn't. It was a different psychological environment entirely. People didn't compare their lives to something better. They compared them to something worse: famine, invasion, total collapse. As long as those didn't happen, life felt stable. And that sense of stability is dangerous, because it hides slow disasters in plain sight. War, when it came, only amplified what was already there. We imagined battles as the primary killers, but disease followed armies more faithfully than weapons. Camps were crowded. Water was contaminated. Wounds festered. And here's the part: no one expects. More soldiers often died from illness than from combat. You could survive the battlefield only to die days later from something no one understood. War was loud. Disease was silent. And silence killed more efficiently. At first glance, this feels like a series of unfortunate facts. Tragic, but distant. Something safely locked in the past. But that sense of distance is fragile, because the systems that protect us, now clean water, medicine, sanitation, education, were not inevitable. They were responses to failure. They exist because millions didn't survive without them. And this is where history stops feeling academic and starts feeling personal. Even boredom is a modern luxury. For most of history, survival consumed attention. There was no time to question, reflect, or doubt deeply held beliefs. Travel, which we romanticize today, was a calculated risk with death. Roads were unsafe. Disease spread quickly. Most people never left the place they were born. The world beyond the familiar wasn't exciting. It was threatening. And this leads to a quiet realization that settles slowly. The people who lived like this weren't reckless. They weren't ignorant by choice. They adapted to danger so completely that it disappeared into routine. If you had lived then, you would have done the same. You would have trusted what everyone trusted. You would have feared what everyone feared. And you would have ignored the dangers no one could see. Because history doesn't shock us because it's strange. It shocks us because it's familiar in ways we don't like to admit. And the line between their world and ours is thinner than it feels. And as we move forward, the most disturbing facts are not behind us. They are the ones that reveal how easily normal life can become dangerous again, without anyone noticing. What comes next isn't about disasters or battles, but about how entire societies failed without realizing they were already living inside the collapse. By the time a society realizes something is wrong, it's usually too late to trace where the danger began. That's because collapse rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive as a single event. It creeps in through habits that feel efficient, practical, and normal. Take urban life, for example. Cities were symbols of progress. They meant trade, protection, opportunity. People crowded into them willingly. Even though cities concentrated every invisible threat humans had already learned to tolerate. Waste didn't just accumulate, it soaked into walls, streets, and water sources. Fires were constant. Buildings collapsed without warning. And still, people stayed. And this pattern repeated everywhere. Once danger becomes predictable, it becomes acceptable. Children grew up watching adults endure illness, injury, and loss without questioning the cause. Pain became a language everyone understood. You learned what could be survived, what usually wasn't, and when to stop hoping. If you reached old age, you were an exception, not a goal. This acceptance shaped morality itself. When death is common, grief changes shape. Food to find, children to protect. Long grief was a luxury few could afford. Children worked young. Punishments were harsh. Mercy existed, but it was selective. Empathy competed with necessity. One of the most unsettling truths is that people often understood their world was dangerous, but not why. Without clear causes, fear became generalized. People feared the night, bad air, strangers, curses, displeased gods. This led to rituals meant to control uncertainty. Some helped psychologically, some caused harm, and some did both. Practices that seem brutal now, like extreme fasting or isolating the sick, were attempts to restore order in a world that felt unstable. The logic wasn't cruelty, it was control. Even knowledge itself could become dangerous. New ideas threatened established explanations that helped people cope. If disease was divine punishment, then questioning that belief didn't just challenge authority, it removed meaning from suffering. And when suffering is unavoidable, meaning is survival. This is why progress moved slowly. It's when humans start connecting invisible causes to visible effects. Clean water reduces illness. Clean tools reduce infection. Ventilation matters, but event and acceptance lagged behind evidence. Habits persisted. Infrastructure took time, and many continued living and dying the old way, while the future slowly assembled itself nearby. Because understanding something intellectually doesn't immediately rewire behavior. Even today, we see this pattern. Survival strategies evolved to minimize immediate danger, even if they increased long-term risk. That trade-off feels familiar, doesn't it? Normalcy is simply what we're used to, and the things we don't question are often the most powerful forces shaping our lives. If you had lived, then you wouldn't have known you were living dangerously. You would have known you were living normally. You would have trusted systems older than you. You would have accepted explanations that brought comfort. You would have adapted, endured, and moved forward just like everyone else. And that realization lingers because it reframes progress. Modern safety isn't proof of superiority. It's evidence of accumulated failure. Every regulation, every medical standard, every invisible protection exists because someone lived without it and paid the price. The quiet tragedies of the past built the invisible armor of the present. So when we look back at historical facts that sound fake, absurd, or impossibly, what unsettles us isn't their strangeness, it's their familiarity, because they reveal how easily humans normalize danger when it arrives slowly, politely, wrapped in routine. And maybe the most uncomfortable question history leaves us with IS and T. What they fail to see but what we've already accepted as normal, simply because it hasn't collapsed yet. History. Dosen. T warns us by showing how strange the past was, warns us by showing how normal danger can feel when it lasts long enough.